The story is set on the Mexican border. It shows a man named Bryant who is a construction worker. Bryant lives in a secluded house, and every morning Bryant always takes the time to practice physically and martial arts. Not only that, Bryant also always hones the martial arts knowledge that he has mastered. But every time he was practicing, there was a teenager named Oscar who secretly followed Bryant's movements. He did this almost every day before he go to school. After finishing his training, Oscar immediately rushed to school so he wouldn't be late. Upon arrival, it turned out that Oscar was a third-grade high school student who would soon be graduating. Meanwhile, Bryant spent his afternoon working. Long story short, after returning from school, Oscar was awaited by a group of gangsters called L-17, and one of its men is named Flacco. Oscar, who was bored because he was always being extorted by Flacco, decided to avoid. Luckily, Oscar managed to hide. This made Flacco and his men lose tracking of Oscar. Meanwhile, Bryant, who happened to be eating at a restaurant, saw Oscar hiding from the L-17 gangsters. In the evening, Oscar's house was suddenly visited by Flacco and the gang, who was still upset because Oscar had run away earlier in the day. Here Flacco says that Oscar must pay money to him. Until Oscar's brother came home, it turned out that Oscar's biological brother was the leader of the L-17 gang, who was now in America. Flacco also threatened not to report this incident to Oscar's brother. The next morning, as usual, Oscar followed Bryant's movements secretly, but it turned out that this time Bryant caught him. Fortunately, Bryant was not angry or upset, but instead he was willing to teach Oscar to train and practice with him. Since then, Oscar has been trained in both physical training and Bryant's basic martial arts techniques. Every day Oscar was eager to practice, until he had been with Bryant for almost 4 months. Oscar was also taught the moves that Bryant had modified himself. As for Flacco, he still often extorts money from Oscar, while Oscar's brother is still in America. On one occasion, Oscar asked Bryant why Bryant wanted to teach him martial arts. Bryant replied that he had seen Oscar being chased by the gangster L-17, and now Bryant thinks Oscar can take care of himself. Oscar says that the leader of the L-17 gang is actually Oscar's brother, but when his brother is not around, Flacco often abuses him. One day, while Oscar and Bryant were practicing, they were suddenly approached by Flacco's car. Apparently, Flacco came there with Oscar's brother. His brother, Hector, is the captain of the L-17 gang. Here Hector doesn't seem too keen on Oscar, his younger brother, hanging out with Bryant. Convinced that Bryant is actually an undercover cop, Hector also asks why Oscar doesn't just hang out with Flacco. Oscar replied that he would rather hang out with Bryant. The next morning, Oscar, who has been banned by Hector from seeing Bryant, decides to visit a gym specializing in MMA and boxing. It is known that Oscar's dream is to become a professional boxer. Here he gets acquainted with a girl named Marisol, who is the daughter of the owner of the gym. One night, Oscar under Hector gathered with the L-17 gang, and there was also Flacco. Then they took Oscar to watch a free boxing fight. Here there is one fighter named the Collector who has never been defeated in the arena. In fact, if anyone can beat the Collector, then he will be given a sizable prize. After the Collector defeated several of his opponents, Oscar suddenly climbed onto the arena and was willing to fight against the Collector. Everyone naturally underestimated Oscar. Meanwhile, Hector is confused as to why Oscar would want to fight the Collector. But when the fight begins, Oscar immediately pulls out the moves that Bryant has learned and taught him. Oscar's martial arts action really amazed the audience until someone recorded it. Until finally, the Collector had to fall in less than 3 minutes. Even in the fight, Oscar was not get hit at all by the Collector. After the fight, Hector was so proud of Oscar. He didn't think that his brother, Oscar, would be that good. Meanwhile, Flacco was so shocked that he would never dare to Oscar again. The next day, Bryant was upset when Oscar brought the L-17 gang to his house. What's more, Oscar had not heard from him for a week and suddenly showed up with the L-17 gang. Hector explained that he was only here to ask Bryant to retrain his brother Oscar, because Hector really wants to see his brother become a professional boxing fighter, especially last night Oscar had amazed everyone. Hearing that, Bryant refused. He asked them not to come to him again. Hector tried to offer Bryant any money as long as Bryant would retrain Oscar, but unfortunately, Bryant still refused. Not accepting this, Hector tried to threaten Bryant by showing the gun he was carrying. But in an instant, Bryant was able to turn things around. Bryant then told them, including Oscar, never to see him again. The scene moves to a lawyer named Pyro playing golf. Not long after, the lawyer was called by someone who said that he had sent a video. When the lawyer saw the video, he was so shocked and immediately rushed to meet his client. The scene moves to the prison. There was a prisoner named Sonny Kilbane, who was a high-class mafia boss. At that time, Sonny was taken to a room because there were people waiting. It turns out that the person waiting for Sonny is the lawyer because Sonny is his client. Here the lawyer shows a video, which turns out to be a video of Oscar's fight that has been viral on social media. What they focus on is Oscar's move by using Bryant's martial arts techniques, and it turns out that Bryant has been targeted by Sonny for a long time. Seeing this, Sonny immediately ordered the lawyer to hire the toughest hitman to hunt down Bryant. And since the video was uploaded at the Mexican border, Sonny now believes that Bryant must be hiding there. It is still a mystery who Bryant really is until a high-profile mafia boss like Sonny is haunting Bryant. The next day, Oscar and Hector are seen at Marisol's MMA gym. Not long after, they were approached by two twin men named Ivan and Vlad, who claimed to be boxing promoters. Apparently, these two people had seen Oscar's action yesterday, which went viral on social media. They were interested in recruiting Oscar. One of them immediately asked if Oscar's teacher was Bryant, while showing his picture. But Hector didn't have time to answer. He immediately kicked them both out. After the twins left, Hector told Oscar that they didn't look like boxing promoters, but like hitmen. Hector believes their main goal is to find Bryant. Because of this, Oscar, who was afraid that Bryant would be hurt, immediately begged his brother to tell Bryant about it. Pressured, Hector finally agreed to go there with Oscar and also Marisol, who wanted to come along. Arriving at Bryant's house, Marisol and Oscar only went down to meet Bryant, while Hector and his two men waited in the car. Here Oscar said that there were two twin men who were looking for Bryant. After being told their characteristics, it turns out that Bryant knows the twin men. They are the most ruthless hitmen in America. At that moment, Bryant tells Marisol and Oscar to get into the house immediately, because Bryant believes that the twin men are already here. Then when Bryant told Hector and two of his men to go in house 2, they were suddenly attacked. Two of Hector's men were shot dead with rifles by the twins.
Hector, run!
Inside the house, Hector pressed Bryant on who Bryant really was, to the point of being hunted by the twins. Bryant finally explained that he was a special police captain who had joined the LAPD and also the DEA. During this time, Bryant was assigned to eradicate the high-profile mafia, and Bryant has managed to arrest one of his chiefs, Sonny, who is now in prison. But as a result of that, Sonny's men continued to hunt Bryant for years, even though Sonny was now in prison. Bryant was a little puzzled as to why they had suddenly discovered Bryant's location. Marisol said maybe they knew from the Oscar fight video that had been viral on social media yesterday. Knowing this, Bryant was upset with Oscar. But what can be made, now it has already happened. On the other hand, one of the twins was to get gasoline in the car to burn Bryant's house, while the other was prepared to shoot. Then Bryant asks Hector to run towards the bulletproof glass in the next 1 minute, which is to distract the enemy. Meanwhile, he would exit through a secret passage. Long story short, 1 minute later, this is what happened. Bryant's plan finally worked, and one of the twins was now dead. Not long after, the brother of the twins arrived with the gasoline he had just taken from the car. But here Bryant was able to corner him too. Bryant then said that he had just killed your brother. Hearing this, the brother was so angry that he threw the gasoline can, and then the spikes hit. In the end, Bryant managed to subvert the man. Here Bryant asked if the person who had hired them was Sony. However, since the person did not want to talk, Bryant poured gasoline on the person's body while threatening to burn him. Unfortunately, the effort was in vain because the person still chose to keep silent to maintain his professionalism as a hitman. Until that person was desperate to take out a lighter, which made him die by burning himself. After Bryant went back inside, Bryant told Hector and the others to leave immediately. Bryant was afraid that there were other hitmen outside. For this reason, Bryant took them into a tunnel under the mattress. While in the tunnel, Hector asked who Bryant's enemy was who was targeting him. Bryant replied that the person who had been targeting him was Sony, who was a high-class mafia boss, and it is known that Sony is also a police general. Sony had long been running an illegal business as an illegal arms dealer, even to the point of selling human beings. Bryant had actually sent Sony to prison for life, but in prison, Sony can still run his business. Sony was even treated well, because Sony had a lot of bribe money. Then Bryant also told Hector about his wife, who was once tortured by Sony's men. Luckily at that time, Bryant was able to save her. But because Bryant was afraid that his wife would continue to be a target, Bryant decided to do a pretend action, so that it seemed as if Bryant committed domestic violence and his wife asked for a divorce. Since then, Bryant has been hiding here. Meanwhile, his wife was nowhere to be found. Then when he reached the end of the tunnel, Bryant immediately told Oscar and the others to leave immediately. Meanwhile, Bryant would return to the house. Long story short, when he arrived home, it turned out that there were already a lot of corrupt policemen there, sent by Sony to arrest Bryant. They were seen breaking down the door. Bryant also started to act. Now there were only 2 policemen left who seemed to have been cornered by Bryant. But here Bryant decided not to finish off the 2 cops and let them go. The next day, Hector and his men went to Bryant's house again, but it turned out that Bryant had already left. Meanwhile, Bryant had cleaned up the corpses from last night, so it looked like nothing had happened there. Afterwards, Hector went home and met Oscar, who was with Marisol. Here Hector says that Bryant is gone, and he is sure Bryant will be fine. Then Hector told Oscar to go back to the gym and train even harder. He didn't want Oscar to waste his martial arts skills that Bryant had taught him. After that, when Hector was to visit L-17's places, suddenly some of his men were eliminated. Hector also made it to the corner. It was discovered that this person was Alex, a corrupt policeman who was released by Bryant last night. Then Alex and his men immediately took Hector to a place for interrogation. Once there, Alex asked where Bryant was now. Hector replied that he didn't know, because he wasn't Bryant's friend, but because Alex didn't believe him, he immediately ordered his men to cut off Hector's ear. But suddenly one of Alex's men fell because he was shot. It turned out to be Bryant. Here Alex says that Bryant should have finished him last night, because that was the only chance that would not be repeated, so boasted Alex. Bryant replied that he still had many opportunities, while finishing off Alex and some of his men. Then Bryant ran away, because his gun had run out of bullets. Alex's men continued to chase Bryant, carrying mesh sheets. Until when Bryant was tired, he did not hesitate to finish off one of Alex's men until there was nothing left. After taking down them, Bryant returned to Hector. Hector himself was so amazed by Bryant's prowess that he was able to easily finish them off. Bryant then took Hector home. At the same time, Oscar and Marisol were seen walking to Bryant's house to make sure whether Bryant had really left. When Oscar was to check the back of the house, he was suddenly attacked. It turns out that it was the DEA police who came there to help protect Bryant. This person named Eric, who is Bryant's subordinate in the police. Eric also told him that Bryant had taught him the same martial arts that Bryant had taught Oscar. Eric then asks where Bryant is now, because the hitman will continue to hunt Bryant, while Eric and his troops are assigned to protect Bryant. Oscar replied that he didn't know. Oscar also came here just to see if Bryant had left. After that, Eric's troops took Oscar and Marisol to go home immediately for the safety of both of them. Bryant, on the other hand, is still on his way to take Hector home. Here Hector asks how Bryant can eradicate a high-profile mafia organization masterminded by a police general like Sony. Bryant replied that of course it wasn't easy. It even took him 12 years to uncover Sony's crimes. Not only that, Bryant also had to disguise himself as a member of the mafia for 7 years. Back to Oscar, who now feels something is wrong with Eric, because Eric is taking him in another direction. Then Oscar secretly contacted Hector to inform him that he and Marisol were being taken by DEA members whose was named Eric. Hearing Eric's name, Bryant was quite surprised, because it turns out that Eric is Bryant's former subordinate who is now defecting to Sony's men. But at the same time, Eric quickly took Oscar's cell phone and threw it on the street. Hector and Bryant now realize that Oscar and Marisol will definitely be taken hostage by Eric's troops. The scene moves to Sony's lawyer. He is with a Mexican mafia boss named Cesar Valdez, or Don Valdez. It is known that Valdez is a business partner of Sony, who has also suffered heavy losses since Sony went to prison. Not long after, Eric arrived with Oscar and Marisol. Here the lawyer explained to Valdez about their intentions and goals. It turned out that the lawyer intended to lure Bryant to come to Valdez's places so that they could easily ambush Bryant. Hearing this, Valdez, who already knew of Bryant's prowess, was of course immediately angry, because he didn't want his places to be destroyed as a result of this plan. But because it was already happened, Valdez finally agreed to the plan, as long as Sony had to pay Valdez $20 million. Then Oscar was given a cell phone to inform his brother that Oscar and Marisol were at Valdez's places. Behind that, it turns out that Hector and Bryant are now gathering with all members of L-17. Here they are strategizing to save Oscar and Marisol. Long story short, some of the L-17 gang came to Valdez's places disguised as Mexican police. Then there was a shootout between them. After that, L-17 members came back on motorcycles. Meanwhile, Hector and Bryant entered through the back door and immediately taken down the people there. Inside the places, Valdez, who got the news that many of his men had been weighed, he immediately expressed his frustration with the lawyer. Oscar and Marisol were tied up in a room and guarded by Valdez's men. But at one point, Oscar manages to untie his hands and take out one of the guards. Back to Hector and Bryant, who now begin to push their way inside while continuing to slaughter Valdez's men. On the other hand, it turns out that now Oscar and Eric are involved in a duel. Unfortunately, Eric manages to grab a gun, and when he is want to shoot Oscar, Marisol suddenly shoots Eric in the leg. After that, they met Bryant, who immediately took them out. But while going out, Valdez tried to attack them with his gun. Luckily, from behind, Hector was able to subvert Valdez. Later that night, the FBI came to Valdez's place, which was now safe. It turns out that the FBI troops came there with Bryant's wife, who had been separated for years. Now Bryant can reunite with his wife. A few days later, Sony was seen being taken by the police to a place, but it turned out that it was a member of L-17 who was undercover. There was also Bryant, who was preparing to finish off Sony, and the movie ended.